ZeroTrust is something that is not really new, but it's not applied everywhere. And I will try to get into why it might be a good thing to consider if you haven't already done that. So, as a background here, we have something which I refer to as network abstraction. Basically, you don't really know where you are in all different networks, which services you use, and how you actually got in to use those, because you might not even know that you have identified yourself and authenticated yourself. And in the future, when we have more 5 and 6G, we will probably have a lot more what we call edge services as well. And those are needed to speed up everything, basically crunch data closer to the users and have less data communicated over networks. But you have all these other types of systems. You have normal cloud services, you have IoT systems that can be more or less anywhere, common IT systems, and IoT OT systems, which is in operational technology networks or production and distribution networks like the electric grid, or if you have clean water production, for instance. And there is a rapid increase in the number of deployed IoT solutions, devices, and OT systems, and what we call as cyber physical systems that are connected. And somehow we need to manage this enormous volume and also ensure that the cybersecurity level is intact. I think we also are at the maximum of historic cyber attacks at the moment as well. So it's the world around us is not that friendly all the time. And this network abstraction, even though I am fairly conscious, I don't know all the time which service or which application and where it is. So since most of our networks that we use are interconnected. Now I have a next slide here trying to illustrate this. So if you have a common office, you might have IT environments to the leftmost, and to the rightmost you might have what we call a factory or a plant of some kind where you produce paper or energy or something like that. Then you might have IoT solutions, OT networks, and you might even have a private mobile network, 5G for instance, that you use. And then you can be connected to your subsites, basically having a private connection. To the rightmost is orange dotted line. So you have some more IT environments or OT production sites or distribution sites. And in the middle, we have the public mobile networks, might be many of them, where you might also put IoT solutions or edge services. And to the left uppermost, you have cloud services and AI services. And you might also have your data centers or outsourcing locations as well. So as you can see, there are even more than this commonly. But it's not that easy to actually know if you sit on your cell phone to know where you are in this little mapping here. And something that many might not have realized yet, or at least a lot of providers of IoT, OT, and network equipment, is that we have a lot of new legal developments within the EU. And this will have a large impact on, in particular, the cybersecurity. And the reason for why EU has put so much on the table at the moment is the increased cost for the cyber attacks on the EU. It costs billions, and that is pretty unnecessary. If we could protect ourselves better, then we would not have unavailability, etc. in society. But for most of us, we have the GDPR and Schrems, basic to protect our personal information. And then we have the NIS2 directive. Basically, that means we need to improve the general level of cybersecurity all over EU, and in particular in networks.
And this goes, of course, for almost any company from a self-preservation perspective, but in particular if you have criticality to society. And if you're part of the value chain of a critical infrastructure or critical provider, then this applies to you as well. And then you have the AI Act, which is emerging, might be applicable too. And then you have the CER, which applies to critical infrastructures like a telecom provider. You have energy, you have clean water, etc. That is critical for society. So they have additional rules. And DORA, that sounds pretty fun, but that is actually for ensuring availability and stability of financial institutions like banks, etc. And basically anyone who is a provider or sub-supplier to these, like telecom providers, also need to apply these rules. So there is a lot of things that you need to analyze. And then we have some more which relates to the equipment used, for instance, in cell phone networks or factories, etc., that communicates, and that is the RED, the Radio Equipment Directive. Basically, anything that emits radio waves of some kind need to adhere to this. And then we have something called CRA, Cyber Resilience Act, and Cybersecurity Acts. And this goes mainly for providers of equipment and systems. So if they basically are in the value chain of critical infrastructures, they need to have quite a bit of security as part of that. The marine business is ahead of the land-based, and they have already made a de facto industrial standard. So if you're interested, you can take a look at the marine business, and it's very likely that the land-based will have something similar. You have some more things that applies to if you have factories, hospitals, etc. And for once, it seems actually like the EU cyber regulations and directives are actually ahead of reality. Usually it's 20 years behind, but now due to the cyber attacks, it's actually ahead. So this is an interesting situation. I don't think we have ever had the situation like this before, actually. So some people call it a compliance nightmare because they have so many new requirements to catch up with. And some of the things that come out of this from the EU is concepts for cybersecurity, and that is called, these are not new, but they are actually getting implemented and requested now. And that is privacy by design. Basically, a system should have privacy when it's built. Then you have security or secure by design. Basically, it should have all security capabilities from start. And secure by default. That sounds similar, but it actually means that it's configured and set up so that it's secure when it's actually commissioned and getting started to be used. So it's almost the same, but not really the same. And then you have the principle of least privilege, and that basically means you should be able to do as little as possible that you need to do, and not as much as possible. So that is basically to minimize potential mistakes and overuse. And all out of this, we have the need for zero trust, and I will get into what that means in a few seconds. As you can see, there is a lot happening, but there are still some important stuff missing, and that is normative standards. Basically, the law says what you need to do, but not how you should do it. So we need that. So that is a big problem at the moment. And I think there is, from my view, a lot of lobbying going on so that the standards should be reasonable, or perhaps too reasonable in my view anyway. So, and to sum this up a little bit, so that if you look at 6G, the cybersecurity in 6G will evolve from 5G, but additional things will be added. And this is to prevent large-scale attacks and ensure network availability. And we have a lot of
things going on. It doesn't matter if it's on the internet or if it's in the mobile networks. The mobile networks might have a little bit higher protection level, but it's still moving a lot of things in there anyway. So what we've done so far in this project is that we have mapped out some challenges and security concerns in 6G. And to start to explain what ZeroTrust is. So basically, when you move from one network or a subpart, a segment or a zone in that network to another, and the security level or security requirements are not the same, we think that the user should always, I mean always, be firstly identified and then authenticated. That means basically you have to prove who you are, basically like using a bank ID certificate or some kind of other app or whatever you have, or password. And then you get access and authorization grants, basically what you can do granted. And ZeroTrust should apply to not only users, but administrators on networks, applications and services always, as well as those who actually manage the networks. So it's not just for the users, it's actually for those professionals who are behind the scenes as well. And the ZeroTrust concept means you never trust anyone, you always verify who they are. And you can do this manually, or if possible, also you make it automatically. And then you might not have to log in all the time, but then you need to have some kind of solution doing that for you. And some examples, if you go to the leftmost bottom, you have two networks that have the same security levels and security rules. And basically, it could be a green light to move on, but I think you should move up a red light there so that when you move over, you actually have to verify who it is that is moving over. It's better. And if you can automatize this, it's not that big of a hassle either. And in the middle, you have a green network moving to a yellow. Yellow means higher level, higher security level. Then it should be identification, authentication. And the same is if you come from a network with a higher level to a lower level, then you should also do it. So basically, it's a great thing to always do this. And here is a lot of things. But in order to achieve ZeroTrust, basically, you need some kind of way to identify and also authenticate the users. And that is sometimes called EAM, Identity and Access Management. And you can have quite simplistic ways of doing it, basically passwords, moving up the ladder to actually combine and automatize this. And I think that if you have really high security requirements, that you should have some kind of two-factor or multi-factor authentication that could be combined with behavior metrics. And that means basically how you type on your keyboard or how you move your mouse, etc., so that it can be recognized for each user. But that requires that actually you have been using your security solution for a while. And who can access or do what, how and from where? We need to have some kind of life cycle management so that we don't have old user accounts, old users that are not supposed to be in the systems. We update the access rights and authorization levels. Basically, if you move from one rule to another in a company or you leave, then that should be basically almost instantly changed. And if you look at different levels of access and authorization, if you are in a company, for instance, it's quite common that you have very simplistic user/operator. That is a rule. Basically, you're using a system of some kind. Then you can have a local admin that can actually do some things on the local system, and then you can have a higher level admin or super user or super admin or something like that. That is a fairly common. You have 3 or 4 levels. So basically, if you would go upwards from a user towards an admin, that is okay. So then you can log, in my opinion anyway, you can log upwards. But if you go the other way around, basically if you're a super user or something like that and want to go down to a user operator, you should be required to log out, because if you're a hacker, otherwise you could access anything if you don't, or if you're not required to log out. So going up is okay, going down is not okay. That could be worth to remember anyway. That's a good principle to use. And further, if you have large networks, it might be a good idea basically to divide them up into smaller pieces. Because if somebody comes in, they will not get everywhere. And another thing is that we need to harden the networks, the servers and everything we use, basically even the cell phones, so that they are not like Swiss cheese. They have a lot of holes in them. So we need to have Swedish cheese instead, which have no holes. And that means basically taking away everything that is not needed, and then you plug everything that is not necessary, like open ports. You take away services. You might do other things as well. That is what we call hardening. Further, we need to check what is going on and see if there are any threats happening. And now and then actually make risk assessments or risk analysis, basically to find out new problems as the world evolves. And we need some kind of policy and policy enforcement, because we need to make some rules. And if we have an infrastructure, so that is actually enforced everywhere. It could be for your internal IT network or your internal corporate network, if going out to cloud services, etc. So what we propose is that we have a ZeroTrust architecture stack in the middle, enforcing policy. And a publication to check if you're interested further in this is Nurun Nahar's EAL's survey on ZeroTrust architecture. Okay, so my final words are: be proactive and not reactive. So secure your assets and your network, etc. And that is a lot better to be proactive than reactive when something happened already. So, okay, yeah, I'm complete now, unless there are any questions. So.
Excellent, thank you, John. I don't think there is any questions in the Q&A. Quick question, very short. Just you talked about these normative standards.
Yes, I can move back to that.
Is there now in relation to 6G? Is that part already? Is that on the table of 3GPP, or where is this? Which organizations are likely to create those standards?
I think for the mobile world, 3GPP is probably working on this as well. But then you have the EU Parliament, that is actually those who will say which is the normative standard. So I think there is a symbiosis in between a lot of organizations, because it has to be reasonable and accurate, and that is not that easy basically for lawmakers to understand all the time. And then it's also a lot of work to do this, so that perhaps it should be in different steps, so that you don't get the big shebang at once, because that might be a little bit problematic if you have a hard enforcement date, basically. So I think that you might have it in a few steps, but we need some kind of normative standards, basically, since it's so many areas. If we just say what to do and not how to do it, it will be very complicated for a lot of, especially companies without a lot of legal people as well. So.
Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you.